Welcome to Silent Queen's Rise. I'm so glad you could join us today. Now, let's dive right into the story. The hedge fund manager arrived at his ex-wife's crumbling Savannah row house in a rented Bentley Continental, carrying a $75,000 cashier's check, a freshly drawn legal document, and a 26-year-old girlfriend named Brooke, who had spent the entire drive from the airport photographing her own reflection in the tinted window. He had come to humiliate. He had come to watch a woman he had discarded sign away the last thing she had left. What he did not know, what he could not have imagined in his most paranoid, sleepless 3 a.m. moments, was that the woman waiting behind that peeling front door had spent 4 years turning his arrogance into the most precise and devastating financial weapon he would ever encounter in his life, and he had exactly 40 minutes before it detonated directly beneath his feet. Chapter 1. The Man Who Never Read the Fine Print. When 48-year-old Harrington Voss pulled the rented Bentley to the curb in front of the narrow brownstone on West Jones Street, he let the engine idle for a long, theatrical moment. It was the kind of pause that men like Harrington had perfected, the performative hesitation of a conqueror surveying territory he had already decided to own. The house looked exactly as he expected. The paint on the exterior was the gray-white of old bone, peeling at the corners in long, listless strips. One of the shutters on the second floor hung at a slight angle, unhinged at the top hinge, swaying almost imperceptibly in the late October breeze coming off the river. The small iron gate at the base of the front steps was oxidized to a dull rust. A terracotta pot near the door held a single overgrown rosemary plant, woody and half-wild, as though it had been tended to once and then quietly forgotten. Harrington stepped out of the car and adjusted the lapels of his charcoal Brioni suit. At 6'2", he still carried himself with the aggressive physical confidence of the college lacrosse captain he had been 30 years ago. His hair was silver now and expensively cut. His watch, a Patek Philippe Nautilus in rose gold, caught the weak November sunlight as he straightened his cufflinks. He turned back to the passenger side. Brooke was still in her seat, attempting to capture a photograph of herself with the Spanish moss-draped oak trees as a backdrop. She was wearing a canary yellow Valentino blazer dress that made her look like a highlighter marker standing on 2 very expensive legs. "Brooke," he said. "We're here." "1 second, I need the light to be right," she murmured, tilting her phone. Harrington exhaled through his nose. He had met Brooke at a charity gala in Palm Beach 14 months ago. She was beautiful, aspirational, and possessed of an absolute bedrock certainty that proximity to money was the same as having it. She reminded him of no one so much as himself, 15 years younger, before he had accumulated enough real wealth to stop caring what things looked like from the outside. He had brought her today deliberately. He wanted Serena to see her. He wanted Serena to understand, with full clarity, what had replaced her. Brooke finally emerged from the car, smoothing her dress and looking at the house with an expression of barely concealed revulsion. "This is where she lives," Brooke said. She placed her manicured hand on Harrington's arm. "Baby, this neighborhood is actually kind of charming in a sad way. Very Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil." "It is not charming," Harrington said flatly. "It is exactly what you think it is. A woman who couldn't keep up, living in the ruins of choices she didn't make." He reached back into the car and withdrew a slim black portfolio. "Come. This will take 10 minutes." He had always been efficient about unpleasant tasks. It was one of the qualities he cited most often when describing his own success. 4 years ago, when Harrington Voss had filed for divorce from Dr. Serena Caldwell, he had done it with the same cold, logistical precision he applied to hostile acquisitions at Voss Capital Group. Serena was 39 at the time. She was a quietly brilliant woman, a computational biochemist with 3 published patents, 2 NIH research grants, and a tendency to fall asleep in her reading chair at 10 o'clock on Friday nights with a monograph open on her chest. She did not attend his firm's annual galas. She did not schmooze. She could not be made to care about the social architecture of the Greenwich fundraising circuit, no matter how many times Harrington suggested, then implored, then finally demanded that she try. When the divorce papers arrived, she had not wept in his presence. She had not hired a pit bull attorney to bleed him in discovery. She had simply looked across the kitchen island where they had eaten 1,000 quiet breakfasts together, nodded once with the measured acceptance of a woman who had already done the math on the situation, and said, "All right, Harrington, if that is what you need." He had walked away from the marriage, feeling faintly cheated of a dramatic confrontation. The settlement had given her a modest cash amount, and the deed to this house, which they had purchased together as an investment property during a trip to Savannah 8 years prior, and never gotten around to renovating. Harrington had assumed, without ever really examining the assumption, that Serena would sell it, or rent it to college students, or eventually let the city condemn it. He had not given her much thought since. He was busy. He was building. Then 3 months ago, Voss Capital Group had entered into preliminary merger discussions with a data biotech firm called Helix Bridge Analytics. Helix Bridge was developing a proprietary molecular data processing system that stood to revolutionize pharmaceutical research timelines. The deal was worth $3.4 billion. It was the largest acquisition of Harrington's career. It was the culmination of everything. And then, the due diligence team had found the problem. Harrington pushed the rusted gate open and walked up the front steps, with Brooke clicking behind him in her heels. He rapped his knuckles firmly on the door. For a moment there was only the sound of wind through the Spanish moss and the distant clang of a trolley bell on Abercorn Street. Then the deadbolt slid back. Chapter 2. What the House Knew. The woman who opened the door was not what Brooke had been expecting. Brooke, who had crafted a mental image of Serena as a faded, brittle woman in shapeless clothes, with the defeated posture of someone who had given up, stared. Serena Caldwell was 43 years old and looked, in the most unsettling way, like a woman who had simply stopped aging, the moment she stopped caring what men thought of her. She was dressed in a pair of wide-leg slate-gray trousers and a loosely draped ivory linen shirt, the kind of effortless unbranded elegance that registers not as fashion but as something more immovable than fashion. Her dark hair was pulled back simply. No jewelry except a single pair of small hammered gold earrings. Her eyes were the deep, uncomplicated brown of someone who had slept extremely well the night before. Those eyes moved from Harrington's face to Brooke's dress, traveled once, briefly and completely, and returned to Harrington's face without any change in expression. "Harrington," she said. Her voice was as he remembered it, calm and unhurried as a river that has decided exactly where it is going. "I wasn't expecting you until 2. You're early." Harrington had been counting on catching her slightly off guard. He recalibrated. "I like to keep ahead of schedule," he said, stepping forward in the unspoken expectation that she would move back. "This is Brooke." "Hello, Brooke," Serena said with a small, pleasant smile that contained no warmth and no hostility and was in some ways more unnerving than either. "Come in." She stepped back. They crossed the threshold. The entry hallway was, as Harrington had anticipated, dark. The plaster walls were unfinished, the exposed lath visible in places, the floor bare wide plank pine. A single antique brass sconce with an Edison bulb cast the corridor in amber half-light. The smell was cedar and something faintly floral, clean in the way old, well-maintained houses are clean. Harrington noted with satisfaction the narrow stairs, the low ceiling, the slightly uneven floor. "Watch your step," Serena said over her shoulder. "The entry hall is still under restoration. The historic Savannah Foundation has specific requirements for the facade preservation." She led them down the hall. They turned left through a low doorway. Brooke made a sound she would later be unable to describe. It was not quite a gasp. It was the involuntary vocalization of a person whose brain receives sensory information that does not match its existing model of reality. The back of the house had been transformed. The wall between the original parlor, the dining room, and what had once been a rear addition had been entirely removed, opening into a single, sweeping space with ceilings that soared 14 feet and were capped by a continuous band of restored original crown molding, hand-painted in a barely perceptible muted gold. The floors were reclaimed Georgia heart pine, a deep amber red that seemed to generate its own warmth. 3 floor-to-ceiling windows along the rear wall had been fitted with original weight restoration glass, and, beyond them, a private walled garden spilled into view. Fig trees, a formal herb garden, a low stone water feature barely audible through the glass, and an antique French garden bench under a pergola thick with November bare wisteria. The walls of the room itself held 5 large canvases, not prints, not reproductions, original paintings, each one lit by a precisely calibrated picture light mounted in the original plaster above it. Harrington's eyes stopped on the piece above the fireplace. It was large, roughly 4 feet by 5, an abstract figurative work in deep ochre and cream. He knew it because he had seen a piece by the same artist sell at Phillips Auction House in New York 2 years ago for $890,000. The furniture was spare and deliberate. A long, low sofa upholstered in warm stone buccal, a single Barcelona chair in cognac leather, a coffee table that was a single slab of ancient live-edge cypress on blackened steel legs. Along one wall, built-in bookshelves floor to ceiling, filled with scientific texts, monographs, and what appeared to be a full run of first edition Toni Morrison hardcovers. In the far corner, tucked into an alcove created by a structural column, sat a custom laboratory-grade workstation. 3 monitors, a server rack, a biometric access panel on the wall beside it. It looked like something from a research university, placed with absolute intention in the middle of a room that could have been an architectural digest. Harrington stood very still. His jaw was set. His mind was doing rapid, unhappy mathematics. Brooke drifted to the center of the room, turning slowly, her Valentino blazer looking suddenly very loud in this space. Did you build all of this? She asked Serena, with a confusion she couldn't quite suppress. I renovated it, Serena said simply, walking to the kitchen, a long, lean room visible through a wide archway. Its counters a single continuous run of honed black granite, its cabinetry a deep forest green, and filling a copper kettle at the sink. It took about 2 years to get right. I was very particular about the details. Harrington walked to the walnut dining table, a long, rectangular piece of impeccable craftsmanship, and set his portfolio down on it. He pulled out a chair and sat. He needed to control the room. He needed to remember why he was here. Serena, he said, I appreciate the home tour, but I have a 4 o'clock in Atlanta. Can we get to business? Serena brought a tray to the table with 2 small ceramic cups and a pot of something that smelled of bergamot and honey. She sat across from him, unhurried. Of course, she said. You're here about Helix Bridge. Harrington's eyes sharpened. He had not mentioned Helix Bridge. He had told his assistant to communicate only that he needed a meeting to review a contractual detail from their divorce settlement. The due diligence flagged an IP question, Harrington said, keeping his voice level. He opened the portfolio and slid a bound document across the table. When we divorced, you assigned all jointly held intellectual property to me as part of the settlement. However, Helix Bridge's tech auditors believe that a specific algorithm, the Caldwell Protein Folding Predictive Model, which underpins their entire processing architecture, may have a documentation gap in the chain of ownership. Serena looked at the document. She did not touch it. It is a technical housekeeping issue, Harrington continued, his voice taking on the smooth, reasonable cadence he used in boardrooms when he needed people to agree to things without reading them carefully. Helix Bridge wants a supplementary IP assignment document signed, specifically naming the CPPM framework, to ensure there are no outstanding claims to the foundational structure. Very standard. Very simple. He reached back into the portfolio and produced the check. $75,000. He laid it on the table beside the document. I want to be fair, Harrington said. I know things have been tight. I know the renovation costs on a property like this are significant. Consider it a goodwill payment for your time. Brooke, who had been drifting along the bookshelf, examining the titles with the expression of someone who had not read a book voluntarily since high school, turned at the sight of the check. She crossed to the table, picked it up without asking, and held it out towards Serena with an expression of bright, aggressive helpfulness. It's incredibly generous, Brooke said. Most people would die for a check this size for signing a piece of paper. Honestly, just take it. And you don't have to think about Harrington or any of this ever again. You can use it to hire someone to fix that gate out front. She laughed once, lightly, as though this were a shared joke. Russell looked at Brooke for a moment with the patient, interested expression of an entomologist observing an unfamiliar species. Then she turned back to Harrington. The Caldwell CPPM, she said. Yes, I remember writing it. She lifted her tea and drank. I remember the specific evening, actually. You were at the Greenwich Lighthouse Gala. I stayed home. I worked for 11 hours and finally cracked the indexing problem I had been stuck on for 4 months. I ordered Thai food that got cold before I remembered to eat it. It was probably the best night of our marriage. Harrington's jaw flexed. Serena, the document. You know what I find interesting, Harrington? Serena set the cup down with a soft, deliberate click. You have never once in our 12 years together, including the 4 years before our marriage, asked me a precise question about how my work actually functioned. You understood that I was brilliant in the abstract. It was useful at dinner parties. But the specific mechanism of what I built was never interesting to you. She tilted her head slightly. That inattention is rather central to why you're sitting in my dining room right now. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Patience. Harrington's voice dropped to the flat, managerial register he used when negotiations stopped being pleasant. I need that signature, Serena. The merger closes in 11 days. This is a courtesy visit. I could have had this resolved in court, could you? Serena said, and something small and precise moved through her expression, fast as a fish turning in dark water. She reached beneath the table and lifted a matte black document folder of her own, setting it on the table with the relaxed certainty of someone laying down a hand they have been holding since before the game started. The Caldwell protein folding predictive model was not jointly developed intellectual property, Serena said, opening the folder and sliding a single stapled document across the table toward him. It was not developed during our marriage at all. It was developed prior to our marriage, over approximately 3 years, between 2008 and 2011. I filed for a provisional patent under a research entity called Caldwell Biometrics LLC in January of 2011. I converted that to a full utility patent in April of 2013. We were married in September of 2013. Harrington stared at the document. The algorithm you believe your company owns, the foundational model that Helix Bridge's entire processing pipeline is built upon, was never marital property, Serena continued, her voice carrying the quiet, geometric certainty of someone reading a proof they wrote themselves. It was never transferred in our divorce settlement because it was never yours to transfer. Caldwell Biometrics licensed the CPPM framework to Voss Capital Group subsidiary Meridian Biodata in 2014 under a 10 years non-exclusive revocable research license. An open beta, effectively. The licensing agreement is in the document in front of you. I would direct your attention to Clause 14C. Harrington's hands were not quite steady as he turned to Clause 14C. He read it. He read it again. License revocation, he said. The words came out flat and airless. The term of the license ran through November 1st of this year, Serena said. I sent formal notice of non-renewal to Meridian Biodata's registered agent 45 days in advance, as required by the agreement. The revocation became effective at midnight, 6 days ago. She paused. Which, if you are doing the timeline in your head, is exactly 3 days after Helix Bridge's due diligence team notified you of the IP documentation gap. Harrington stood up. He did it without meaning to, the way a person stands when their body needs to do something physical because their mind has temporarily stopped processing language. He placed both hands flat on the table. You're lying, he said. The CPPM architecture was developed on Meridian Biodata infrastructure, on company servers, using company resources. That makes it company IP under any standard work-for-hire doctrine. Serena had clearly been waiting for exactly this argument. I was never an employee of Meridian Biodata, she said. I was a contracted independent researcher, engaged through Caldwell Biometrics LLC as an entity. My contract, also in that folder, tab 3, explicitly preserves all underlying IP ownership with Caldwell Biometrics. Meridian Biodata's own legal team drafted that contract, Harrington. Your people wrote the clause that protects me. A pause. You might want to have a conversation with whoever was responsible for that oversight. Harrington picked up his phone. His fingers moved across the screen. He dialed his general counsel, a sharp, exhausted man named Philip, who had been a reliable fixer for 11 years, and who answered on the second ring. Philip, Harrington said, his voice barely controlled. I am sitting across from Serena. She is telling me the CPPM was never company IP, that it was licensed, not owned. Tell me this isn't possible. Tell me the due diligence team missed something she's wrong about. The silence on the other end of the line lasted approximately 4 seconds. They were among the worst 4 seconds of Harrington Voss's adult life. Harrington. Philip's voice was the voice of a man who had not slept in 3 days. We have been in the archives since Thursday. The provisional patent date is 2011. The utility patent is 2013. The marriage was September 2013. The licensing agreement is airtight. We don't own the architecture. We never did. A long exhale. Helix Bridge's team found the same documents this morning. They have asked for an emergency. Call with us at 5 o'clock. Fix it, Harrington said. I can't fix the patent date, Harrington. Then injunct her. Sue for breach of implied ownership. Something. There is nothing to injunct, Philip said, with the measured gravity of someone choosing words very carefully. She owns it. The revocation was properly executed and legally served. Without the CPPM license, Helix Bridge's processing pipeline cannot function. They are going to withdraw. Another pause. I think they may already have. I've been trying to reach their general counsel for 2 hours. His assistant says he is in a call with their board. The line went quiet. Then Philip said, Do not sign anything. Do not say anything else to her. I'll call you back, and disconnected. Harrington lowered the phone. Brooke, who had been sitting very still in the Barcelona chair with the rigid, wide-eyed alertness of someone trying to understand a foreign film without subtitles, said in a small voice, "Babe, what is happening right now?" Harrington did not answer her. He was looking at Serena. Serena was looking back at him. She had not moved from her chair. She had not raised her voice. She had not smiled with any triumph. She looked precisely as she had looked when she opened the door, like a woman who had slept extremely well and had nowhere in particular she needed to be. 4 years, Harrington said. His voice had shed its authority. What was left sounded unexpectedly young. You've had this entire time to do something with that patent. Why now? Why wait until I was 11 days from closing the biggest deal of my career? Serena considered the question as though it were genuinely interesting to her. Because 4 years ago, she said, Voss Capital Group was worth approximately $400 million. Damaging it then would have been proportional but not instructive. You would have raised more capital. You would have found another algorithm, another angle. You would have rebuilt and decided you had survived something you deserved to survive. She tilted her head fractionally. I needed you to build higher. She stood up from the table. She walked to the tall windows and looked out at the walled garden, where the fig leaves had gone gold. And a white cat Harrington had not previously noticed was sitting on the stone water feature with the patient imperial self-containment of something that had never doubted its right to exist in this space. I needed you to get close enough to the summit that you could genuinely taste what it felt like, Serena said. I wanted the moment gravity took over to mean something, to be unmistakable. She turned back. I wanted you to understand the precise weight of what you dismissed. Chapter 4. The Email. Brooke stood up abruptly and said she needed some air and walked down the hallway toward the front door, with the specific energy of someone recalibrating their future in real time. The heavy wooden door opened and closed. Harrington barely registered her leaving. He was watching Serena, who had returned to her seat and was refilling her tea from the copper pot with the unhurried composure of a woman with a full afternoon ahead of her. Name a number, Harrington said. The billionaire's last tool, liquidity. Whatever you need. Full purchase of Caldwell Biometrics LLC. I will write the check today. I will make you a partner in the Helix Bridge deal. You will walk away from this wealthier than you have ever been in your life. Reinstate the license, Serena. Let this close. Serena looked at him with something that was not quite pity and not quite contempt, and was perhaps simply the expression of a person watching someone offer to buy a thing that has never been for sale. Harrington, she said, very gently, Helix Bridge didn't walk away from your deal because they stopped wanting the technology. He went still. From the pocket of her linen shirt, Serena removed her phone. She unlocked it, tapped twice, and slid it across the walnut table toward him. It was an email chain. The most recent message was time-stamped 40 minutes ago. It was from the president of Helix Bridge Analytics, a woman named Dr. Genevieve Okafor. It was addressed to Dr. Serena Caldwell, CEO, Caldwell Biometrics LLC. Harrington read it. The subject line was, Confirmed, full acquisition of Caldwell Biometrics LL final terms. The body of the email was 6 lines. Helix Bridge Analytics and its parent company had approved the acquisition of Caldwell Biometrics LLC and all associated intellectual property, including the Caldwell protein folding, predictive model, and its derivative frameworks, for a total consideration of $2.2 billion in cash and equity. The initial wire transfer would be executed within 48 hours of regulatory filing. Dr. Caldwell was invited to join the Helix Bridge executive team as chief scientific officer. The email closed with a single line that lodged itself in Harrington's chest, like a shard of cold glass. We have been hoping this opportunity would arise for some time. They didn't withdraw from the deal, Serena said softly. They redirected it. When their auditors traced the real ownership of the architecture, they didn't see a problem. They saw a door. She retrieved her phone. They went around you, Harrington. They went directly to the source. The room was absolutely silent. Then Harrington's phone began to detonate. The notifications arrived in a cascade, one after another, each one a precise and specific instrument of demolition. A text from Philip. Helix Bridge just officially withdrew from the VCG acquisition. Filing with the SEC in 30 minutes. I'm so sorry. A push notification from the Wall Street Journal. Breaking. Helix Bridge Analytics terminate 3-4B acquisition of Voss Capital Group amid IP ownership dispute. VCG shares halted on NSE. A call from the Voss Capital Group chairman of the board, a man Harrington had considered an ally, which Harrington stared at without answering. A second call. A third. Then a text from Brooke. Harrington, I talked to my manager and she thinks this is going to be really bad for my brand association. I think we should take a break while you get this sorted. I'm going to grab a car to the airport. There's a flight to LA at 6. I already checked in on your Amex. Harrington sat back down in the Hans Wegner chair. He had not noticed it was a Hans Wegner when he sat down before, but he noticed it now, the way you notice everything with terrible precision when the scaffolding of your ordinary life is coming apart. And he placed his phone face down on the table and stared at the middle distance. She's gone, he said. It was not a question. It appears so, Serena said. He looked at his ex-wife, stripped of the deal, stripped of Brooke, stripped of the boardroom certainty that had armored him since they were graduate students in Boston. Harrington Voss looked exactly his age. He looked like a man who had run very fast for a very long time, without ever looking at where he was going. Serena, he said. His voice was quiet and unrecognizable. I was wrong, in the divorce, in the marriage. I know that. I have known it for some time. He pressed his hands flat against the table, a gesture that seemed to be about steadying himself. Please, not everything. Leave me something to rebuild from. Serena looked at him for a long moment. She did not search for pity. She had done that search privately. Over 4 careful years. She knew exactly what she found. Do you remember, she said, the morning the divorce papers arrived? We were in the kitchen. You were going to a board meeting. You had your coat on. I asked you if we could talk first, just for 20 minutes, and you looked at your watch and said you were late. And you walked out. She paused. That was the last real conversation I tried to have with you. Every communication after that was through attorneys. She folded her hands on the table. You didn't dismiss me in the divorce mediation, Harrington. You dismissed me on a Tuesday morning in our kitchen when I asked for 20 minutes of your time and you looked at your watch. He had no answer for this. Chapter 5. What the Quiet Built. Harrington left the way people leave places that have beaten them, with his collar up, his eyes forward, and his expensive shoes making small, defeated sounds on the cracked stone of the front steps. The rented Bentley was still at the curb, because Brooke had taken a car service to the airport, rather than the car he'd been paying for, which was a detail Harrington would only appreciate later, as particularly Brooke-like. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time without starting the engine. His phone, which he had retrieved from the walnut table and slid into his breast pocket without looking at it, was vibrating with an insistence that had passed urgency and arrived somewhere in the neighborhood of geological fact. He did not take it out. What he did eventually was drive away from West Jones Street, past the Spanish moss and the old squares and the tourists photographing the October light, and he did not look back at the house. Inside, the heavy door had barely settled into its frame. Serena stood in the entryway for a moment and listened to her house. It had a particular silence, this house, different from the silence of spaces that were empty or abandoned. It was the silence of something fully inhabited, the silence of a life that had been built with immense care and had not required anyone else's permission to exist. She walked back into the main room. The afternoon light through the restoration glass had shifted in the time Harrington and Brooke had been here, moving from the left-hand windows to the center ones, and the room had changed accordingly. The heart pine floors going from amber to a deeper, more reddish gold. She picked up Harrington's teacup, which she had never touched, and carried it and her own to the kitchen. She washed them both by hand, the warm water running over the smooth ceramic. It was a quiet, ordinary thing, and she was grateful for its ordinariness. Her phone produced a soft chime from the counter, a message from Dr. Genevieve Okafor. The board call just wrapped. Everyone is enthusiastic. Legal is filing the preliminary acquisition paperwork tonight. See you in New York on Thursday? Serena dried her hands on a linen towel and typed back. Thursday works. Looking forward to it. She set the phone down and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the walled garden. The white cat had relocated from the water feature to the top of the garden wall, where it was watching the street below with the disinterested sovereignty of something that had made its peace with gravity and uncertainty. Serena had built this house. Not the renovation, though that too, but the life inside it. In the years since the divorce, with the same methodology she brought to her scientific work. She had broken the problem down to its fundamental components. She had removed every assumption. She had been patient with the data and merciless with wishful thinking. She had worked in silence, which had always been when she worked best. People who did not know Serena Caldwell well had sometimes described her, during the marriage, as passive, quiet, perhaps a little detached. They had meant these things as criticisms, or at least as observations carrying the faint weight of a criticism. Serena had understood, without needing to correct them, that there is a quality that looks like passivity from the outside and is, from the inside, something else entirely. It is the quality of a person who has decided, with full information and zero sentimentality, exactly what they are building and exactly how long it is going to take. It is the patience of someone who is never waiting, someone who is always working. She walked to the corner alcove and sat down at her workstation. She pressed her palm to the biometric panel. The monitors came to life, filling with the clean, intricate architecture of the CPPM framework, branching pathways, predictive loops, the elegant foundational logic she had first roughed out on a yellow legal pad in a studio apartment in Cambridge in 2008 when she was 29 years old, and Harrington Voss had not yet walked into her life. The code was beautiful. It had always been beautiful. It would continue to be beautiful long after the $2.2 billion settled into its accounts and the acquisition paperwork filed, and the news cycle moved on to the next thing. She opened a new file. She had been working on an extension of the framework, an application to protein degradation pathways that no one had mapped yet. She had been working on it for 8 months, methodically, in the early mornings before the city woke up, with the same uninterrupted focus she had always done her best thinking in. She began to type. Somewhere across Savannah, in the rented Bentley on the bridge over the Savannah River, Harrington Voss's phone was ringing again. The board chairman, the attorneys, the financial press, the entire elaborate structure of the life he had believed, was impenetrable, coming apart at the load-bearing walls he had never thought to examine. And in the quiet house on West Jones Street, with the late October light pouring through restoration glass onto Georgia heart pine floors, and the white cat settling back into its position on the garden wall, and the code unspooling on the screen in perfect, unimpeachable lines, Serena Caldwell was already somewhere else entirely. She was in the next problem. She was in the work. She was as she had always been, exactly where she intended to be. If this story reminded you that the quietest people in the room are sometimes the ones who have already won, subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back for the next one. The women worth watching are never the ones making the most noise.